Let's bring in Nikole Killion for more insight into what happened last night. So, Nikole, it's clear that both Vice President Pence and Kamala Harris, frequently pivoted to answering the question that they wanted to answer. It wasn't just Pence who did that. And there was some serious, though, policy discussions that were being discussed. For example, the Supreme Court, clearly the Trump administration's response to the coronavirus. Did both candidates achieve what they set out to do?
Well, as far as their campaigns are concerned, they did. As far as Senator Harris, for instance, both before the debate and after the debate, aides told me that really her main goal last night was to speak directly to the American people. You saw a number of times her turn directly to the camera, similar to what the former vice president did in last week's debate. And really their aim was to paint this contrast between what a Biden-Harris administration would do compared to the current administration. So I think on those fronts, that's more or less what you saw and heard from Senator Harris last night. As for the vice president, his team also saying they feel that he did a fantastic job and really hit on all the points that the campaign wanted to make last night. I think that's why you saw him, elaborating over time and interrupting the senator a number of times to convey his points and also to try to paint Senator Harris as someone who is to the left of Joe Biden. That certainly has been a point the campaign has been trying to pound as well.
So President Trump and Joe Biden are the oldest candidates to run for president. You mentioned that there was a bit of ducking going on in the debate. The vice presidential candidates were asked about potential succession plans, and they kind of ducked that question. Both of them did. And so my question to you is whether or not this is actually sort of a real issue. Certainly the candidates have been suggesting of each other, the presidential candidates, that though they're not bringing up the age, they are suggesting that there may be issues related to age that may hamper their ability to do the job, pointing fingers at each other. But do you think it was a mistake to not address this issue head on?
Well, look, actually, the Harris campaign was asked about that yesterday in a press call, whether or not she should have whether or not she has had any conversations with the former vice president, and the campaign wouldn't give a direct answer to that either. I mean, look, it's a touchy subject to talk about someone's age, but it is relevant. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been a question in the debate. That being said, it is a concern from the standpoint of the age of these candidates. Obviously, as the moderator pointed out last night, given the president's current diagnosis of coronavirus and the lack of transparency in some cases with regard to his medical condition and, his current status as far as how he is recovering from the virus. There have been a lot of mixed messaging as far as his care is concerned. So it is a very relevant issue. And so as far as voters and viewers were concerned, it is, I don't want to say a mistake, but it certainly doesn't help the viewer or voter decide if they can't get an answer to that question. On the other hand, it is a sensitive topic. It is something that clearly the candidates did not want to talk about, and certainly it's possibly an issue that will likely be raised again.
So, Nikole, one of the vice president's more aggressive attacks on Senator Harris was to press her on whether Democrats would add more Supreme Court justices if Judge Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed. She didn't take the bait, just as Biden hasn't in recent weeks. How is this topic weighing in on the campaign?
Well, this is something I actually pressed the campaign on ahead of the debate yesterday. I spoke with Senator Harris's chief of staff to see if the senator last night would provide some more clarity on the Biden-Harris position, because as you mentioned, the vice president did not respond to questions about it in the last debate, nor did Senator Harris. And the vice president, Vice President Mike Pence, did make a point of calling that out in last night's debate, saying that he wants it on the record that she did not have an answer. So that being said, it is certainly an issue that I'm sure will arise again, potentially, if these debates go forward, as you know, and reported previously. That is something that is now in question.
Okay, so another topic that the vice president, some might say he ducked. He declined to say what he would do if Joe Biden wins the election and the president refuses to accept a peaceful transfer of power. We know that the president had been asked that. He's been asked that multiple times, and he sort of always kind of gives a non-answer. So here's what the vice president had to say.
When you talk about accepting the outcome of the election, I must tell you, Senator, your party has spent the last 3.5 years trying to overturn the results of the last election. Let me just say, I think we're going to win this election. President Trump and I are fighting every day in courthouses to prevent Joe Biden and Kamala Harris from changing the rules and creating this universal mail-in voting that will create a massive opportunity for voter fraud.
All right, so there you go. Vice President didn't answer the question, pivoted back to what the Democrats are doing, and then something that we've heard the president talk about, which is sort of a raised skepticism about the voter fraud and mail-in ballots. This is an issue, though, that it's kind of like one of those a misstep that really doesn't need to happen. That for some reason, the President Trump doesn't want to clarify. So I guess I want to sort of ask you, is this issue actually, are voters concerned about this issue, or is it sort of much ado about nothing in terms of, the media coverage and the way the candidates talk about it, but at the end of the day, there is faith in the system?
Yeah, well, I think it's somewhere in between on that spectrum, right? I mean, I think anytime the president says something, you have to pay attention and take it seriously. On the other hand, I would say that despite what the president has put out, suggesting that there may not be this peaceful transfer of power behind the scenes, we do know that the White House has been complying with the documents and deadlines that are required to have an effective transition of power. And so that is something that has been reported out. But, so in essence, what the president is saying versus what the White House is doing isn't necessarily matching up. And so that being said, as I mentioned, I think you have to look at both sides of the spectrum, and that maybe the answer is somewhere in between, because we don't, the president is always full of surprises. We don't know what he will do. But as far as, again, complying with the process and the procedure, we do know that that is happening. So one can hope, certainly, that things will transfer peacefully. And of course, the Constitution dictates that there must be one come January. So again, I think it's something we'll have to keep an eye on.
Well, just to add to that, Anne-Marie and Nikole, the fact of the matter is, you're right, Anne-Marie, to ask the question if it's something that voters should be concerned about. But this would all go away if the first time the president of the United States is asked about this, that he says, what kind of a question is that? The Constitution, states very clearly when the term of the president of the United States ends, and it has been like that since the founding of our republic, of course. Instead, he sort of hems and he haws, and then a couple of days later, you get another statement. It's the same thing with the Proud Boys. Why not just in the moment completely say how you feel without having to clarify or to backtrack or to point to other instances rather than the most recent instance? And that's why people keep asking the question, well, what's going to happen if the president or now the vice president refuses to answer a question straight up and to the camera? And so I guess that's where we are.
Nikole, can I ask you one more question before we let you go?
Sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. I was also going to say, at times, too, though, the president has been full of bluster. And like I said, I think you have to take what he says seriously, but also, in some cases, take it with a grain of salt. This is a very serious matter, of course. And like I said, I think you have to look at the actions of what the administration is doing. So far, they are complying with what they need to do to have an effective transfer of power. So if you're looking at the actions, it indicates that there will be one. If you look at what the president says, obviously, to your point, yes, he should be more specific. But as you know, the president likes to say a lot of things that cause consternation, that cause controversy. So, again, I think you kind of have to take it for what it's worth.
Nikole, just really before we let you go, to these added precautions when it comes to the coronavirus, just at the end of the debate, we noticed that Kamala Harris's husband came out with a mask on to greet her and congratulate her. The vice president's wife did not. Do we know whether or not there was, an obligation or an expectation that she would be wearing a mask, or just what happened there?
We don't, and I think that's a good question to inquire about, because this is the second time we've seen at a debate where the commission has made clear that they want guests to wear a mask. And even before the debate, the head of the debate commission made a very pointed note to the audience that anyone who did not wear a mask would be escorted out by security, by law enforcement, he actually said. And so in this instance, here again, we saw the second lady come up on stage without a mask. Whether that was intentional or not, we don't know. But certainly we saw something similar last week in the presidential debate, where members of the Trump family came into the debate hall. They weren't wearing their masks once they were seated, and were told by Trump campaign officials that, no one tried to stop them from doing that. And since then, of course, we did see this kind of more stern statement from the debate commission saying that they would enforce this mask mandate. When you have these high-level officials, obviously it's unclear if a different set of rules is being applied to them. That certainly is something that has been suggested. Whether or not that was the case again last night, I think requires further explanation from the debate commission and certainly from the second lady and the Trump campaign.
Yeah, Nikole, real quick, we didn't even bother you and talk to you about the fly, because that's not what we do here at CBSN. But
because it was too fly.
Right, exactly. Because you are fly,
or super
Nikole.
fly.
You are fly. But also,
pick your favorite fly expression.
there was, though, a lot of question on social media, at least, about the vice president's eye. Now, I know that can happen. We recall when Vice President Biden participated in the debate and he popped the blood vessel. But there were some people asking about that eye. So I wonder if throughout the course of your reporting, you'll hear back from the Pence people what was going on with his eye, because it did look like he had something happening there. So that may be fodder for another day. But yeah, we weren't gonna. The fly is for social media.
Well, we'll leave it there.
Hey, Nikole Killion for us. Thank you, Nikole.